My guest on the Europe Conversation this week is Foreign Affairs Minister for North Macedonia, Tymcho Maczynski. He was here at NATO for the Foreign Affairs Summit. He says his country is ready to join the European Union, but he says if Brussels doesn't act fast, Russia will fill the void. Foreign Minister Tymcho Maczynski, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe Conversation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be a guest in your studio.
So I might start off with EU enlargement for North Macedonia. I mean, obviously, you were one of the first of the Western Balkans to apply for EU membership over 21 years ago. But it appears that, well, it's not appears, North Macedonia is very much lagging behind for a number of reasons around rule of law. And we had these historical disputes with Bulgaria and also the Greek dispute, which was resolved, but it appears less so now. Can you just talk us through this trajectory for North Macedonia?
So, I mean, without a doubt, we are one of these countries that has been historically, since its independence, committed to EU and NATO integration. We realized our goal of becoming a NATO member, but the key foreign policy priority of our country that has not been realized is EU membership. This year is what I call a sobering anniversary. It's 20 years since we have gained candidate status. In the meantime, the EU has enlarged. We started this process at one point even going further back to the stabilization and an association process together with Croatia. Croatia is now a member of Schengen. It uses the euro as a currency. We still haven't opened accession negotiations. Of course, there have been faults by governments in terms of lack of delivery on some issues, without a doubt. But what is also a fact is that we have been a victim of far too much bilateralization of the EU process. Instead of focusing on criteria, on merit-based issues, focusing on bilateral issues that have nothing to do with the substance of a nation's path towards EU membership.
This is a fair point, and two of those countries, as I mentioned there, Bulgaria and Greece, in particular in the Bulgarian issue, because obviously these countries have a veto anyway, so whether you like it or not, the bilateral issues have to be resolved in some way. Will there be an inclusion for the Bulgarian minority within the constitution of North Macedonia?
The issue is much more than the issue of inclusion of the Bulgarian minority, and I'll try in a nutshell to explain this to you. First of all, who has the most to gain from our country becoming an EU member? Of course, first, it's us, without a doubt. But secondary, it is the countries around us that are member states of the European Union. And here I mean Greece and Bulgaria directly. Now, in these more than 30 years of an EU path, we have made extremely difficult compromises. As I've mentioned many times before, we've changed our flag, we've changed our currency, we've changed our constitution several times. We've even changed the name of our country. All with the promise of a window of opportunity that we've been told existed if we do these changes for our path towards the European Union. And thus, the question and the dilemma that we pose to both EU institutions as well as the member states is, will this be the final compromise? Will we know that if these constitutional amendments are made, 6 months down the road, a year down the road, again, there will not be a veto because of a bilateral issue? Why we pose this question? First of all, to protect our own national interests, to not allow issues related to language, history, identity to engulf our EU accession process, but also at the end of the day to protect the credibility of European enlargement in the entire region, because there are malign actors out there who like to point the finger and say, do you really believe that the EU is honest in its intention for enlargement? Look at what they're doing to the Macedonians.
And then we also had the Prespa agreement, which resolved the issue around Greece. But we have heard in the past or recently some ministers refusing to use the name North Macedonia, which again will create problems and confrontations with Greece. Is that an issue still?
I mean, if I speak personally as an individual and I remove myself from the position that I have, then I will never be able to say to you that I am happy with the Prespa agreement, that I believe the Prespa agreement is good, or that I believe the changing of the name of a nation is fair, especially in the 21st century. But at the end of the day, as foreign minister and as a lawyer, I understand that the principle of pacta sunt servanda and that agreements must be kept, especially in international public law, is a fundamental principle. And in that sense, we are a nation that will respect its obligations, but also a nation that expects its partners its neighbors in the region to also respect obligations in these agreements that they've made towards us.
Okay, because you mentioned there Pacta sunt servanda, agreements should be kept, and one of the issues that the EU has with North Macedonia and joining the EU is around the rule of law,
Yes.
Independence of the judiciary, various types of corruption, and obviously that's hugely problematic because all EU member states will point to the deficiencies in the EU when they had the last bout of enlargement, particularly countries like Hungary, Slovakia, and so on. So where is North Macedonia with making greater progress on this?
So this is one of the key priorities of our government. Our government was formed less than a year ago, and it has taken very direct steps towards fighting corruption, both high-level corruption, but also corruption that exists in mid-level and low-level civil service, establishing a system of rule of law, but this is not something that we can do overnight. And I would once again reiterate, it is also a whole-of-society effort. It's not just about the executive delivering, but it's about a cultural change that has to happen within the judicial system. It's about bringing on board civil society and various different actors.
And how long will that take? Because, I mean, this has been on the agenda for, as you mentioned, 21 years.
Regrettably, it's been on the agenda in rhetoric for maybe more than 30 years.
Yeah.
But substantially very little has been done. This is a process where we need to establish clear timeframes. Many of these types of timeframes going into the micro and meso aspects of these issues have already been done for us with the help of the European Union and European Union experts. And then we need to start delivering. Because this delivery is about government doing its job, but it's about creating this, as I said, cultural change within society, which helps stimulate investment, which helps stimulate entrepreneurship, which puts young people in a situation where they don't want to leave the country, because many young people are departing not just because of economic reasons, but because of an infunctional system of governance, and also hopefully put our country in a situation where young people that are living abroad want to come back, invest in the country, build families in the country, take part in political activities in the country. I mean, this is the priority of our government.
I want to move on to the NATO foreign ministers meeting you're here. First of all, can I ask you a little bit about Russian interference in North Macedonia? I mean, one of the reasons why enlargement needs to happen quickly, they say, is because the countries in the Western Balkans need to be brought into the EU away from the Russian orbit. Is that something that you would agree with, that narrative, that premise?
I think enlargement needs to happen for many reasons, but one of these reasons, from a security perspective, is of course the malign Russian influence that has been existing in our region, that is there. I sometimes like to very openly point out that Russian influence, especially in our region, comes very cheap. And they know how to utilize it.
Is it through social media? Can you tell us a little bit about hybrid, cyber attacks? What is it?
It's a mix of all of the very conventional methods, if I can label them, that Russia does use, and that happens in our region as well.
And does it impact young people's viewpoint? Does it impact political parties? What is the upshot for countries like North Macedonia?
So I think, first of all, generally our society and our political establishment, going from government to opposition, is extremely pro-EU.
Okay.
And society wants to move forward towards EU membership. But one of the things that happens is when there's lack of clarity coming from the European Union and the member states, especially our issue is a prime example, then you will have Russian influence utilizing this to say, listen, the EU is not honest. It will never integrate the region. And if there's lack of delivery, credible delivery on the other side, then it's a battle that the pro-EU forces in our country have to wage with these various different spheres of influence that do exist and that will be utilized. I think one of the reasons why the EU needs to be very quick and expedient in its delivery to the entire region is to show that the clarity is there, the strategic vision is there.
Can I ask you then, why did your country abstain on the UN resolution condemning Russian aggression in Ukraine?
So our country, I like to point out, has three constants in its foreign policy. One of them is 100% alignment with the EU's common foreign and security policy. The second is our membership in NATO. And the third is our strategic partnership. We have a formal strategic partnership with the United States. In this situation, what I can say is that we have been one of the most consistent supporters of Ukraine. From the NATO member states, we are one of the biggest supporters per GDP per capita for Ukraine in terms of defense and security support. But in this current situation, because there was no alignment within the CFSP, within the European Union, we chose to vote aligned with our strategic partner, the United States, which means that we do support Ukraine. And we do support the necessity for protecting Ukraine's integrity and territorial sovereignty. But we also agree that there needs to be a path towards peace. So even that decision was in line with the very consistent foreign policy that we've had as a nation.
How do you find then the negotiations so far, where it appears that very little concessions, or actually no concessions, have been applied to Russia from the United States, and several to Ukraine, whether it's their energy systems, whether it's critical minerals, whether it's about a ceasefire? I mean, how do you see the US treatment of Ukraine vis-a-vis the negotiations?
So the perception that I have is that Ukraine is on board with this process and is actively taking part in this process. And at the end of the day, Ukraine is a sovereign nation that must make decisions for itself. What I can say is that we, as a NATO member country, support the path towards peace. It seems very obvious right now that the United States has a path towards peace, which they believe is viable. And in that sense, considering that Ukraine is on board with this process, we absolutely support the process that is being led by the Trump administration, Secretary Rubio, as well as the whole team, in finding a peaceful solution as soon as possible.
Okay. Foreign Minister Tymcho Maczynski of North Macedonia, thank you very much for joining us on the Europe
Thank you very much
Conversation.
for the invitation.
Thank you so much.